Precedes reason. Life does not begin with logic. It begins with wanting. Before people develop explanations for their actions, they develop attractions, ambitions, curiosities, fears, and cravings. Desire creates movement long before reason creates justification. Many prefer to imagine themselves as rational actors who carefully evaluate circumstances before acting. In reality, the sequence is often reversed. An inclination emerges first, followed by explanations that make it appear reasonable. What feels like objective judgment frequently begins as personal attraction or aversion. This pattern appears throughout human behavior. Careers are pursued, relationships are formed, and goals are adopted because something within them resonates emotionally before it can be defended intellectually. The mind then constructs narratives that transform instinct into principle. Those who study only explanations often arrive after the decisive moment has already passed. The deeper cause was present long before words were found to describe it. Fulfillment cannot end wanting. Many imagine that obtaining what they desire will bring lasting contentment, yet satisfaction rarely endures as long as anticipation. The excitement surrounding attainment often exceeds the pleasure of possession itself. The mind adapts quickly to what it acquires. What once seemed extraordinary gradually becomes familiar. The achievement that dominated attention yesterday becomes part of the background today. Desire does not disappear when fulfilled. It merely changes direction. This cycle explains why accomplishment often feels less transformative than expected. People arrive at destinations only to discover that their attention has already begun shifting toward another objective. The conclusion of one pursuit frequently marks the beginning of the next. The promise of permanent satisfaction keeps desire alive. The reality of temporary satisfaction ensures it never ends. Endless wanting creates restlessness. Because every fulfilled desire gives rise to another, many lives become defined by pursuit rather than arrival. A lingering sense of incompleteness emerges when contentment is constantly postponed into the future. This restlessness often disguises itself as productivity. People remain occupied not because every activity is necessary, but because movement feels preferable to stillness. Constant engagement provides temporary relief from confronting deeper dissatisfaction. The more attention becomes attached to future acquisition, the harder it becomes to appreciate present reality. The mind learns to value what is absent more than what is available. As a result, fulfillment remains perpetually out of reach. A horizon retreats as one approaches it. Endless wanting follows the same principle. Distraction protects against self-confrontation. Stillness often reveals what activity conceals. When external stimulation fades, people encounter their own thoughts, anxieties, uncertainties, and unresolved desires. For many, this experience is uncomfortable. As a result, distraction becomes attractive. Entertainment, conversation, work, and routine provide distance from self-awareness. These activities are not inherently harmful, yet they frequently serve a secondary purpose beyond their obvious function. The modern world offers endless opportunities for avoidance. Attention can be directed outward almost indefinitely. Yet avoidance does not remove dissatisfaction. It merely postpones the encounter. What is ignored in silence does not disappear. It simply waits for the noise to end. Solitude reveals what company hides. Companionship often softens awareness of personal dissatisfaction. The presence of others provides reassurance, stimulation, and shared attention. In social environments, uncomfortable questions can remain unnoticed. Solitude operates differently. Without external distractions, individuals become more aware of their own emotional condition. Concerns that were previously obscured become difficult to ignore. This explains why solitude can feel both valuable and uncomfortable. It removes many of the mechanisms that ordinarily conceal inner tension. What remains is a clearer encounter with oneself. Many seek company to avoid feeling alone. Far fewer discover whether they are at peace when no one is present. Expectations create disappointment. Reality rarely arrives in the form imagination predicts. Before events occur, the mind constructs idealized possibilities filled with hope, certainty, and favorable outcomes. These expectations frequently exceed what life delivers. Disappointment emerges from the distance between anticipation and experience. The greater the expectation, the greater the potential frustration when reality proves less accommodating. This does not mean optimism is inherently harmful. It means that imagination often operates without the limitations that reality must obey. Possibilities appear effortless in thought and far more complex in practice. Life breaks fewer promises than imagination makes. Experience corrects illusion. Certain truths remain inaccessible until they are lived. Advice, theory, and prediction can provide guidance, but experience possesses an authority that abstraction lacks. Many illusions survive because they remain untested. They appear convincing until reality applies pressure. Only then do their weaknesses become visible. What once seemed obvious begins to appear incomplete. This process is rarely comfortable. Illusions often resist evidence because they are connected to hopes, identities, or emotional investments. Yet repeated encounters with reality gradually weaken what can no longer be sustained. Reality is patient. Every illusion eventually encounters it. Emotion shapes judgment before reason. People often imagine that decisions emerge from careful reasoning, yet emotions frequently establish direction long before conscious analysis begins. Feelings influence attention, interpretation, and preference from the outset. Reason still plays an important role, but it often functions as a tool for organizing and defending conclusions that have already been emotionally favored. Logic refines decisions more often than it originates them. This tendency appears across politics, relationships, beliefs, and personal choices. Individuals naturally seek arguments that support what they already feel inclined to accept. Reason frequently believes it is leading. More often, it is explaining where emotion has already gone. Anxiety grows from attachment. Uncertainty becomes threatening when outcomes feel essential. The more strongly an individual becomes attached to a particular result, the more vulnerable they become to anxiety concerning its loss. Possibilities transform into necessities. What was once desired begins to feel required. As attachment increases, so does the fear that circumstances may unfold differently than hoped. This dynamic explains why anxiety often accompanies valuable goals, relationships, and ambitions. Concern is not created solely by uncertainty itself, but by the importance assigned to specific outcomes. Fear grows in proportion to what the mind refuses to lose. Possession creates the illusion of permanence. Ownership encourages a subtle assumption that what is present today will remain tomorrow. People become accustomed to possessions, circumstances, relationships, and identities until they begin to feel permanent. Time quietly challenges this belief. Everything exists within conditions that change. What appears stable often proves temporary when viewed across longer periods. Loss feels painful partly because permanence was unconsciously assumed. The shock arises not only from what disappears, but from the realization that it was never guaranteed to remain. Time is the final argument against permanence, and it wins every debate. Memory reconstructs more than it records. What people call memory is often less like a recording, and more like a reconstruction. Events are not preserved exactly as they occurred. They are reshaped, simplified, and reorganized each time they are recalled. Details fade while interpretations remain. Facts become less important than the meaning assigned to them. Over time, recollection becomes increasingly influenced by present circumstances, rather than past realities. This explains why two individuals can remember the same event differently. Each preserves not merely what happened, but what seemed significant, emotional, or useful to retain. Memory becomes a story told from a particular perspective. The past survives chiefly as interpretation, and interpretation is never entirely fixed. Circumstances change without permission. Many assume that stability is the natural condition of life, yet circumstances shift constantly, often without regard for preference, preparation, or expectation. Fortunes improve and decline. Relationships strengthen and weaken. Opportunities emerge unexpectedly and disappear just as quickly. Change rarely waits for readiness. Resistance to this reality often produces unnecessary frustration. People become attached not merely to what exists, but to the expectation that it should remain unchanged. The greater the attachment, the more disruptive change appears. Life does not negotiate with preference. It proceeds according to conditions larger than any individual desire. Chance shapes more than effort admits. Effort matters, but effort alone cannot account for outcomes. Every achievement contains elements that lie beyond planning, discipline, and intention. Timing, circumstance, opportunity, and luck influence results in ways people often underestimate. Success encourages individuals to emphasize their choices, while overlooking fortunate conditions that supported them. Acknowledging chance does not diminish accomplishment. Rather, it creates a more accurate understanding of reality. Humility becomes easier when one recognizes how many factors contributed to success. The role of chance becomes most visible when equally capable people arrive at very different destinations. Control is often exaggerated. People naturally seek control because control provides reassurance. The belief that events can be directed creates a sense of security in an uncertain world. Yet many forces remain outside individual influence. Economic conditions, natural events, the actions of others, and countless unforeseen circumstances shape outcomes regardless of personal intention. This does not mean effort is meaningless. It means effort operates within limits. Problems emerge when imagined control exceeds actual control. The desire for control offers comfort. Reality repeatedly reminds people where its boundaries lie. Adversity reveals what success conceals. Success often hides weaknesses. Favorable outcomes can make poor habits appear effective and flawed reasoning appear wise. Adversity removes these protections. Difficult circumstances expose character, resilience, judgment, and emotional discipline more clearly than periods of prosperity ever could. Challenges force individuals to confront aspects of themselves that comfort allows them to ignore. Under pressure, assumptions are tested, and weaknesses become difficult to disguise. Storms reveal the strength of a structure more effectively than calm weather ever can. Appearances direct attention. The visible almost always receives more attention than the important. People notice what stands out before they notice what matters. This tendency influences every area of life. Presentation, confidence, appearance, and visibility frequently shape perception long before substance receives examination. What is easiest to see often gains the greatest influence. The result is a persistent imbalance between attention and importance. Significant causes remain unnoticed, while superficial effects dominate discussion. Importance often requires deliberate effort to discover. Priorities determine direction. A life is ultimately shaped by what receives consistent attention. Priorities determine where energy is invested, what opportunities are pursued, and which sacrifices are accepted. Many individuals believe their values guide their lives, yet actual priorities are often revealed more clearly by behavior than by stated beliefs. Time and attention expose commitments more honestly than words. Small decisions accumulate. What appears insignificant on a particular day gradually influences years and eventually entire lives. Direction is rarely chosen once. It is chosen repeatedly through everyday priorities. Habit replaces deliberation. Repeated actions gradually become automatic. Behaviors that once required conscious effort begin operating with little awareness at all. This process creates efficiency, but it also creates vulnerability. Habits can preserve useful behaviors just as easily as destructive ones. Once established, they influence actions without requiring active decision-making. Many people imagine they are constantly choosing. In reality, much of daily life unfolds through patterns created long ago. Habits quietly inherit responsibilities once carried by deliberate thought. What is repeated often enough eventually stops asking for permission. Character emerges through repetition. Character is rarely formed through dramatic moments. It develops through repeated choices accumulated over time. Each action strengthens certain tendencies while weakening others. Integrity, discipline, patience, courage, and generosity grow through practice rather than declaration. The same principle applies to less desirable traits. Because character develops gradually, its formation often goes unnoticed, yet over years, repeated behaviors become increasingly difficult to separate from identity itself. People become what they repeatedly practice, whether intentionally or not. Action becomes destiny in retrospect. When looking backward, lives often appear to follow a coherent path. Events seem connected, outcomes appear logical, and decisions appear destined to produce the results they produced. This perspective creates an illusion of inevitability. What appears obvious in hindsight was frequently uncertain while it was unfolding. Possibilities that once existed disappear from memory once only one outcome remains. The story of a life becomes clearer after it has been lived. During its unfolding, clarity is far more difficult to find. Retrospection arranges uncertainty into narrative and calls the result destiny. Uncertainty accompanies every important decision. The most meaningful choices are rarely made with complete information. If certainty were available, decision-making would be little more than calculation. Instead, people are forced to act while important facts remain unknown. This uncertainty creates discomfort because outcomes matter. Careers, relationships, investments, and personal commitments all require movement before guarantees can be obtained. Waiting for perfect clarity often becomes another form of indecision. Many seek certainty before acting, yet certainty frequently arrives only after action has already been taken. Experience fills gaps that thought alone cannot resolve. The willingness to move forward despite uncertainty separates decision from hesitation. The desire for certainty exceeds the possibility of it. People crave certainty because certainty feels safe. It reduces anxiety, simplifies choices, and creates the impression that the future can be anticipated. Yet reality rarely offers such assurances. Information remains incomplete, circumstances evolve, and outcomes emerge from countless interacting variables. Absolute certainty exists far less often than people would prefer. The discomfort produced by uncertainty encourages many to accept weak conclusions simply because they provide closure. A questionable answer often feels more comfortable than an unresolved question. The appetite for certainty is unlimited. Reality supplies it sparingly. Certainty often comes at the expense of truth. When certainty becomes more valuable than accuracy, understanding begins to suffer. Complex realities are simplified, doubts are dismissed, and ambiguity is treated as a flaw rather than a feature of reality. The attraction of certainty lies in its emotional benefits. Conviction feels stronger than hesitation. Confidence appears more impressive than caution. Yet confidence and correctness are not identical. Throughout history, many false beliefs survived because they provided reassurance. Their popularity reflected emotional appeal rather than factual strength. Truth often arrives carrying questions. Certainty prefers answers regardless of their quality. Identity defends itself against contradiction. Beliefs become difficult to examine once they become part of identity. An idea is no longer viewed as something a person holds, but as something they are. Under such conditions, disagreement feels personal. Evidence is interpreted as an attack. Criticism becomes threatening, and correction feels humiliating rather than helpful. This defensive reaction emerges because identities provide stability. People naturally protect structures that help define who they believe themselves to be. Arguments rarely threaten facts alone. They often threaten the identities built around them. Stories organize reality. Reality presents itself in fragments. Events occur without obvious structure. Causes overlap, and outcomes emerge from countless influences. Stories provide order where experience provides complexity. Narratives simplify understanding by connecting events into meaningful sequences. They explain motivations, assign causes, and create coherence from scattered information. Without stories, reality often feels overwhelming. With them, life becomes easier to navigate. The danger arises when the simplicity of a story begins replacing the complexity of reality itself. People remember narratives because narratives transform confusion into meaning. Simplicity gains influence faster than complexity. Simple ideas travel easily. They require less effort to understand, explain, and remember. Complexity, although often more accurate, demands patience and attention. As a result, simplified explanations frequently dominate public discussion. They provide quick answers to complicated questions and offer certainty where nuance would require caution. This tendency creates tension between understanding and convenience. The most appealing explanation is not always the most complete. A simple answer reaches the crowd long before a complicated truth catches up. Categories clarify and distort. The mind organizes reality by sorting it into categories. This process allows rapid understanding and efficient decision-making. Without categories, navigating the world would become overwhelming. Yet every category involves simplification. Differences are ignored, exceptions are overlooked, and unique circumstances are compressed into broader groups. Classification creates clarity at the cost of precision. The benefits are significant, but so are the limitations. Every label illuminates certain features while concealing others. Misunderstanding creates conflict. Conflict rarely begins with hostility alone. It frequently begins with differing interpretations of reality. Individuals act according to what they believe to be true, even when those beliefs contradict one another. As misunderstandings accumulate, disagreements become increasingly difficult to resolve. Each side sees evidence supporting its own perspective, while remaining skeptical of opposing views. The problem becomes greater when assumptions remain unexamined. People often debate conclusions while overlooking the premises that produce them. Many conflicts persist not because facts are unavailable, but because interpretations refuse to meet. Different experiences create different worlds. No two individuals experience life from exactly the same position. Family, culture, education, opportunity, hardship, and circumstance all influence perception. As experiences diverge, so do values, priorities, and assumptions. What appears obvious to one person may seem incomprehensible to another. Each perspective emerges from a different collection of experiences. Recognizing this does not eliminate disagreement, but it helps explain its persistence. Understanding becomes easier when differences are viewed as products of experience rather than defects of character. People do not merely hold different opinions, they often inhabit different interpretations of reality. Values are defended most fiercely when fragile. Strong convictions are often assumed to reflect certainty. In many cases, the opposite is true. The beliefs defended most aggressively are sometimes those most vulnerable to doubt. When confidence is genuine, Disagreement poses little threat. When confidence is unstable, opposition becomes difficult to tolerate. Challenges provoke emotional reactions because they expose uncertainty already present beneath the surface. This dynamic appears in politics, religion, ideology, and personal identity. Intensity alone reveals little about the strength of a belief. The loudest defense is not always evidence of the strongest foundation. Conviction often conceals doubt. People tend to imagine conviction as the opposite of uncertainty, yet conviction frequently emerges as a response to uncertainty rather than its absence. Beliefs become emotionally important when they provide stability, identity, or meaning. Because of this, questioning them can feel threatening. The stronger the emotional investment, the greater the temptation to defend rather than examine. This does not mean every conviction is false. It means confidence alone reveals little about the quality of an idea. A person may be completely certain and completely mistaken at the same time. The need to protect a belief often reveals more than the belief itself. Comfort can become a cage. Comfort is attractive because it reduces effort, uncertainty, and risk. It creates an environment where familiar routines replace difficult choices. Yet the conditions that provide comfort often discourage growth. New abilities, deeper understanding, and meaningful change usually require discomfort of some kind. Remaining within familiar boundaries limits exposure to what lies beyond them. Many opportunities are ignored not because they lack value, but because they require temporary discomfort. The immediate desire for ease outweighs the potential benefits of challenge. What feels safest in the present may become most restrictive in the future. Growth begins where comfort ends. Development rarely occurs under ideal conditions. Growth demands adaptation, and adaptation requires encountering situations that exceed existing abilities. Whether intellectual, emotional, or practical, improvement begins when familiar methods become insufficient. The discomfort associated with learning is not a sign of failure, but evidence that expansion is occurring. Many abandon worthwhile pursuits because difficulty is interpreted as a warning rather than a requirement. Yet progress and discomfort often arrive together. The threshold of growth is usually marked by resistance. Reality rewards attention more than preference. People naturally focus on what they wish were true. Unfortunately, reality responds to conditions rather than desires. Ignoring facts does not diminish their influence. Circumstances continue operating regardless of whether they are acknowledged. The consequences of neglect often arrive long after the opportunity for correction has passed. This principle applies equally to finances, relationships, health, and decision-making. Preference influences perception, but attention influences outcomes. Reality has little interest in personal wishes. It responds to what exists. Resilience is built through repetition. Strength is often imagined as an inherent quality. More frequently, it is the result of repeated exposure to challenge. Each difficulty survived expands confidence in one's ability to endure future difficulties. Capacity develops gradually through experience, rather than appearing suddenly through inspiration. This process is rarely pleasant. Resilience is formed by confronting obstacles, not avoiding them. The experiences that strengthen character are often the same experiences people would prefer to escape. Endurance is accumulated one challenge at a time. Limits become visible through resistance. Many personal limitations remain hidden until they are tested. Confidence can create the illusion of capability, where evidence has yet to exist. Resistance provides clarity. Obstacles reveal weaknesses in knowledge, discipline, preparation, and character. What seems sufficient in theory becomes measurable in practice. Although uncomfortable, this revelation is valuable. Growth depends upon recognizing limitations before they can be addressed. Boundaries are easiest to discover when one attempts to cross them. Acceptance reduces unnecessary conflict. A significant portion of human suffering comes not from circumstances themselves, but from resistance to circumstances that cannot be changed. Acceptance is often misunderstood as surrender. It separates facts from preferences and allows energy to be directed toward what remains possible. Without acceptance, effort becomes trapped in arguments with reality. The mind repeatedly revisits conditions that remain unchanged, generating frustration without progress. Reality becomes easier to navigate once it is no longer treated as a negotiation. Peace emerges when struggle loses its target. Many people imagine peace as something that must be acquired, yet peace often appears when certain pursuits finally lose their urgency. The constant effort to control, secure, preserve, and perfect creates ongoing tension. When these efforts loosen, even briefly, a different state becomes possible. This does not eliminate ambition or responsibility. It simply reduces the burden created by treating every outcome as essential. Peace arrives quietly because it enters through absence rather than acquisition. Understanding changes the nature of desire. Desire loses some of its power when its mechanisms become visible. What once felt absolute begins to appear predictable. The individual recognizes recurring patterns. Anticipation exceeds fulfillment. Acquisition creates new wants, and satisfaction fades more quickly than expected. Awareness does not eliminate desire, but it changes the relationship to it. The mind becomes less easily persuaded by promises it has encountered repeatedly before. Perspective replaces urgency. Understanding weakens impulses that once seemed irresistible. The circle returns to its beginning. Many journeys through life appear linear while they are unfolding. Only later does their circular nature become visible. Questions thought to be answered return in new forms. Lessons learned once require relearning. The search for meaning often leads back to the forces that initiated the search itself. Desire begins the movement. Experience complicates it. Reflection clarifies it. Eventually, understanding returns attention to the original source. The final insight often resembles the first, viewed from a greater distance. Awareness does not guarantee change. Recognizing a problem and overcoming it are separate achievements. Many people assume that understanding naturally produces transformation, only to discover that habits continue long after their weaknesses become obvious. Knowledge can illuminate a pattern without disrupting it. A person may clearly see their flaws, contradictions, and self-defeating tendencies while continuing to repeat them. Insight removes ignorance, but it does not automatically create discipline. This gap explains why advice is easier to give than to follow. Understanding operates in thought, while change demands action repeated over time. A truth can be fully understood and still remain unconquered. Habits defend themselves. Patterns of behavior develop a momentum of their own. Once established, they resist disruption regardless of whether they are beneficial or harmful. This resistance exists because habits reduce effort. Familiar actions require less attention than unfamiliar ones. The mind naturally favors efficiency, even when efficiency preserves undesirable outcomes. Attempts at change often fail because people underestimate the strength of repetition. They challenge years of conditioning with a few moments of motivation and expect immediate results. What has been reinforced daily cannot be replaced casually. Motivation is less reliable than discipline. Motivation receives enormous attention because it feels powerful. It inspires action, creates enthusiasm, and generates momentum. Its weakness lies in its inconsistency. Motivation fluctuates according to mood, circumstance, energy, and emotion. What feels compelling today may feel unimportant tomorrow. It continues regardless of inspiration. While motivation initiates movement, discipline sustains it through periods when enthusiasm disappears. The distance between intention and accomplishment is usually crossed by discipline rather than desire. Self-deception prefers convenience. People often imagine deception as something directed toward others. In reality, the most convincing falsehoods are frequently the ones individuals tell themselves. Self-deception survives because it protects comfort. Unpleasant truths threaten identities, ambitions, and assumptions. Convenient explanations preserve them. This tendency appears in countless forms. Failures are blamed on circumstance, weaknesses are renamed strengths, and contradictions are quietly ignored. The mind becomes remarkably creative when defending a preferred narrative. A lie becomes most dangerous when its author and audience are the same person. Pride resists correction. Correction requires acknowledging imperfection. Pride makes this process difficult by attaching self-worth to being right. The more strongly identity becomes connected to competence, intelligence, or judgment, the harder it becomes to admit error. Mistakes are experienced not as information, but as threats. This creates a paradox. The individuals most committed to appearing correct often become least capable of improving. Growth depends upon recognizing limitations, while pride encourages their concealment. The unwillingness to be wrong eventually becomes the inability to become better. Humility expands understanding. Humility is often misunderstood as weakness or self-doubt. Properly understood, it is an accurate awareness of one's limitations. A humble person remains open to revision because certainty is not treated as a possession that must be defended. New evidence can be considered without feeling personally threatening. This flexibility creates advantages unavailable to rigid minds. Learning becomes easier, adaptation becomes faster, and mistakes become sources of information rather than embarrassment. Understanding grows most freely where ego occupies the least space. Attention determines experience. Life is not experienced in its entirety. It is experienced through attention. What receives focus expands in significance, while what is ignored fades into the background. This principle shapes emotional life more than many realize. Gratitude, anxiety, resentment, curiosity, and contentment all depend partly upon where attention consistently settles. Two individuals can inhabit identical circumstances while experiencing entirely different realities because they attend to different aspects of them. Attention is the lens through which existence becomes personal. Comparison distorts satisfaction. People rarely evaluate their circumstances in isolation. Instead, they compare themselves to others and judge their position accordingly. This habit transforms abundance into insufficiency. Achievements lose value when someone else possesses more. Progress becomes invisible when attention remains fixed on those further ahead. Comparison alters perception rather than reality. Circumstances remain unchanged, yet satisfaction rises or falls according to relative position. Contentment becomes difficult to maintain when value depends upon outperforming others. Envy confuses possession with fulfillment. Envy emerges when another person's advantages are mistaken for another person's happiness. Visible success creates assumptions about invisible satisfaction. Yet external achievements reveal little about inner experience. Wealth, status, beauty, and influence may solve certain problems while creating others. The envious observer compares private struggles to public appearances and inevitably reaches distorted conclusions. Important information remains hidden from view. What is desired most intensely is often understood least completely. Gratitude changes what is visible. The mind naturally notices problems. Threats demand attention because survival once depended upon detecting danger more effectively than opportunity. Gratitude redirects awareness toward what is already present. It does not deny hardship or ignore imperfection. Instead, it broadens perception beyond what is missing. This shift can dramatically alter experience without altering circumstances. The environment remains the same, yet its meaning changes through attention. Abundance often becomes visible only after the search for deficiency relaxes. Familiarity breeds blindness. Repeated exposure changes perception. What is encountered daily gradually stops attracting attention, regardless of its importance. This tendency explains why people often overlook what is closest to them. Relationships, opportunities, freedoms, and privileges become ordinary through constant presence. Appreciation fades not because value disappears, but because familiarity conceals it. The mind evolved to notice change more readily than stability. What remains constant becomes background. Awareness shifts elsewhere. Many losses are mourned only after absence restores visibility. Scarcity increases perceived value. What is abundant is often taken for granted. What is limited attracts attention. Scarcity creates urgency because opportunities appear finite. Time, resources, relationships, and experiences become more desirable when their availability seems threatened. This principle influences far more than economics. Human attention naturally gravitates toward what may soon disappear. Limitation transforms ordinary things into objects of significance. People often discover value only when abundance can no longer be assumed. Time is the most unequal resource. Wealth can be accumulated. Knowledge can be expanded. Influence can be increased. Time operates differently. Every individual receives it continuously yet possesses no ability to store it. Once spent, it cannot be recovered, exchanged, or recreated. Its movement remains constant regardless of status or circumstance. Because time arrives gradually, its significance is often underestimated. Days feel plentiful while years disappear unexpectedly. The most valuable resource is frequently the one treated as though it were endless. Delay creates illusions of permanence. The future often appears distant, even while it approaches continuously. Because consequences arrive gradually, people assume there will always be more time to act. Important conversations are postponed. Ambitions are delayed. Opportunities are deferred. The absence of immediate consequences creates confidence that delay carries little cost. Yet time accumulates quietly. What seems postponable today eventually becomes impossible tomorrow. Distance creates comfort. Time eliminates it. Regret is often a product of inaction. Failure carries disappointment, but inaction frequently leaves a deeper mark. Attempts at least provide answers. Avoidance preserves uncertainty. People spend years wondering what might have happened had they spoken, acted, risked, or committed. The imagination continues exploring possibilities reality never resolved. This lingering uncertainty gives regret unusual persistence. Mistakes can be understood. Untaken paths remain permanently unfinished. The roads never traveled tend to remain the easiest to romanticize. Courage is action despite fear. Fear is often mistaken for weakness. In truth, fear accompanies many worthwhile pursuits. Courage does not require its absence. It requires movement despite its presence. The individual who waits to feel fearless may wait indefinitely. Every meaningful commitment contains uncertainty. Relationships, ambitions, creative work, and personal growth all involve risks that cannot be fully eliminated. Fear closes possibilities. Courage keeps them open. Risk cannot be eliminated. Many seek a strategy that guarantees success while avoiding loss. Such a strategy does not exist. Every decision excludes alternatives. Every commitment sacrifices other possibilities. Every opportunity carries uncertainty. Risk is not a flaw in life but one of its permanent conditions. Attempts to eliminate risk frequently create new forms of risk. Excessive caution can become as costly as recklessness. Avoiding danger entirely often means avoiding possibility as well. Security and freedom pull in opposite directions. Security offers stability, predictability, and protection. Freedom offers possibility, exploration, and independence. The difficulty is that maximizing one frequently limits the other. Complete security restricts flexibility. Complete freedom removes safeguards. Most lives involve negotiating this tension rather than resolving it. Different people accept different balances according to their values and circumstances. The challenge is not choosing one forever, but understanding what each requires in return. Responsibility creates meaning. Obligation is frequently viewed as a burden, yet responsibility provides structure, direction, and purpose. Commitments force attention beyond immediate impulses. They connect individuals to goals, relationships, communities, and futures larger than themselves. Without responsibility, freedom can become aimless. Choices lose significance when nothing meaningful depends upon them. Meaning often enters life through the very obligations people initially resist. Meaning is discovered through participation. Many search for meaning as though it were a hidden object waiting to be found. More often, meaning emerges through involvement. Purpose develops through engagement with work, relationships, creation, service, and struggle. It grows from participation rather than observation alone. Waiting passively for significance to arrive usually produces frustration. Meaning tends to reveal itself through action rather than contemplation alone. A life becomes meaningful not because it is explained perfectly, but because it is lived fully. Meaning requires sacrifice. Every meaningful pursuit demands the surrender of alternatives. Time devoted to one goal cannot be spent elsewhere. Commitments create value precisely because they exclude competing possibilities. Many people desire significance without cost. They seek achievement without effort, relationships without vulnerability, and purpose without obligation. Yet meaning derives much of its weight from what must be given up to obtain it. The more valuable the objective, the greater the sacrifice it usually requires. This exchange is not a flaw, but part of the process itself. What costs nothing is rarely treasured for long. Attention is a form of investment. Where attention goes, life follows. Time, energy, and awareness accumulate around whatever consistently occupies the mind. This principle operates regardless of intention. Attention invested in resentment strengthens resentment. Attention invested in learning strengthens understanding. The mind develops according to what repeatedly receives its focus. Many underestimate this process because individual moments seem insignificant, yet small allocations of attention compound just as investments do. A life is often shaped less by major decisions than by recurring focus. Repetition creates identity. People tend to define themselves by beliefs, intentions, or aspirations. In practice, identity emerges more reliably from repeated behavior. A person becomes patient through practicing patience. Discipline develops through repeated discipline. Character forms through accumulated action rather than isolated declarations. Because repetition occurs gradually, its effects often go unnoticed. Yet, over time, recurring behaviors create patterns strong enough to resemble destiny. What is practiced consistently eventually becomes difficult to distinguish from who one is. Excellence is usually ordinary effort repeated. Exceptional outcomes often appear dramatic when viewed from a distance. Up close, they are usually composed of countless ordinary actions repeated over long periods. Mastery rarely arrives through sudden transformation. It emerges through persistence, refinement, correction, and repetition. Small improvements accumulate until they become difficult to ignore. The attraction of shortcuts often obscures this reality. Dramatic solutions are more exciting than gradual progress, even when gradual progress proves more reliable. The extraordinary is frequently the result of the ordinary performed consistently. Talent attracts attention. Persistence creates results. Natural ability is visible. Persistence is less glamorous. Talent can accelerate progress, but its advantages diminish when unsupported by effort. Many gifted individuals fail to fulfill their potential because they rely upon strengths that eventually encounter limits. Persistence operates differently. It compensates for weaknesses, survives setbacks, and continues advancing long after enthusiasm fades. Potential determines where a journey begins. Persistence determines how far it goes. Success changes problems rather than eliminating them. Many imagine success as the end of difficulty. In reality, success often replaces old problems with new ones. Achievement creates expectations. Recognition attracts scrutiny. Responsibility expands alongside influence. The obstacles change form, but they rarely disappear entirely. This realization surprises those who treat success as a permanent solution. Every stage of life introduces challenges appropriate to its circumstances. The absence of problems is not the reward for success. Different problems are. Expectations rise with achievement. Accomplishment alters standards. What once seemed impressive becomes normal. Success establishes a new baseline from which future performance is judged. This adjustment occurs internally and externally. Individuals expect more from themselves while others expect more from them as well. Previous achievements lose their ability to satisfy for long. The result is a moving target. Progress changes perspective, making former ambitions appear smaller than they once seemed. Every summit reveals another horizon. Recognition cannot provide lasting satisfaction. Approval feels rewarding because it signals acceptance, admiration, or belonging. Yet recognition is an unstable foundation for fulfillment. External validation depends upon circumstances beyond personal control. Public opinion changes, audiences shift, and attention moves elsewhere. What is celebrated today may be ignored tomorrow. When self-worth becomes dependent upon recognition, stability becomes difficult to maintain. Satisfaction rises and falls with forces that cannot be directed. Praise is enjoyable to receive but unreliable to inhabit. Dependence on approval creates vulnerability. The need for approval grants influence to whoever provides it. When validation becomes essential, independence begins to weaken. Decisions become shaped by anticipated reactions. Authentic judgment competes with social acceptance. The desire to belong gradually alters behavior. This does not mean approval lacks value. Human beings are social by nature. Problems emerge when acceptance becomes more important than truth, integrity, or self-respect. The more approval is required, the less freedom remains. Self-respect outlasts applause. Applause is temporary. Reputation fluctuates. Public opinion changes direction with remarkable speed. Self-respect operates according to different standards. It depends less upon external reaction and more upon alignment between values and behavior. Because of this, it remains available even when recognition disappears. A person may possess widespread admiration while lacking self-respect. The reverse is also possible. The two should not be confused. What others think can elevate confidence for a moment. What one thinks of oneself determines whether it lasts. Success does not end desire. Achievement is often imagined as a final destination. People picture a moment when goals are fulfilled, ambitions are realized, and striving finally comes to an end. Yet success rarely produces this outcome. New possibilities emerge, expectations expand, and attention shifts toward objectives that previously seemed distant. What once appeared sufficient gradually becomes ordinary. This pattern reflects the nature of desire itself. Fulfillment satisfies temporarily before creating space for another pursuit. Achievement changes the object of desire without eliminating the mechanism that produces it. The finish line often becomes another starting point. Possession changes appreciation. Objects, opportunities, and achievements appear different before and after they are obtained. Distance encourages idealization. Ownership introduces familiarity. The imagination focuses on benefits while overlooking costs. Once possession occurs, attention adjusts. Advantages become expected, while inconveniences become more visible. This transformation explains why anticipated satisfaction frequently exceeds actual satisfaction. The value of a thing is often greatest while it remains just beyond reach. Desire sees possibilities, possession sees realities. Adaptation is the mind's default state. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to adapt. Circumstances that once seemed remarkable gradually become normal through repeated exposure. This process explains both resilience and dissatisfaction. People recover from hardships more effectively than expected, yet they also become accustomed to advantages more quickly than anticipated. Adaptation protects psychological stability, but it also weakens appreciation. Extraordinary conditions slowly lose their ability to feel extraordinary. What astonishes today often becomes routine tomorrow. Pleasure diminishes through repetition. Experiences derive part of their intensity from novelty. The unfamiliar captures attention because it stands apart from ordinary experience. As repetition increases, emotional impact tends to decline. Activities that once produced excitement become predictable. The mind requires less attention to process what it already knows. This tendency drives the search for new experiences, new goals, and new forms of stimulation. Familiar pleasures gradually lose the power they once possessed. Repetition transforms excitement into expectation. Novelty creates the illusion of importance. Novelty creates the illusion of importance. New experiences often feel more significant than they truly are. Freshness attracts attention, and attention amplifies perceived value. This bias explains why recent developments frequently dominate thought. The unfamiliar appears larger simply because it occupies more mental space. Over time, perspective returns. Events once considered transformative reveal themselves as minor, while overlooked experiences sometimes prove decisive. Attention measures immediacy more accurately than importance. Excitement is not the same as fulfillment. Excitement generates energy, anticipation, and emotional intensity. It feels powerful because it directs attention toward possibility. Fulfillment operates differently. It is quieter, more stable, and less dependent upon constant stimulation. Many people confuse the absence of excitement with the absence of meaning. This confusion encourages endless searching. The pursuit of intensity replaces the pursuit of depth. Novel experiences are accumulated while deeper satisfaction remains undeveloped. A spark attracts attention. A steady flame provides warmth. Patience extends possibility. Impatience seeks immediate results. It values speed because delay feels uncomfortable. Yet many worthwhile outcomes require time. Skills develop gradually. Trust forms slowly. Understanding deepens through repeated experience rather than sudden revelation. Patience allows processes to unfold according to their nature rather than personal preference. It recognizes that forcing progress often weakens the very thing being pursued. Some outcomes arrive only for those willing to wait longer than their frustration. Impatience narrows vision. When results become urgent, perspective contracts. Attention focuses on immediate outcomes while overlooking longer-term consequences. This narrowing effect can produce poor decisions. Short-term relief is chosen over lasting benefit. Immediate gratification outweighs future advantage. Impatience does not merely accelerate action. It alters judgment by reducing the range of possibilities considered. The shorter the horizon, the easier it becomes to mistake urgency for wisdom. Discipline protects the future from the present. Human beings naturally favor immediate rewards. Present desires feel more vivid than future consequences. Discipline acts as a counterbalance. It allows long-term interest to influence present behavior. Through discipline, future benefits compete more effectively against immediate temptations. Without this capacity, short-term impulses dominate decision-making. What feels good now repetitively undermines what would matter more later. Discipline gives tomorrow a voice in today's decisions. Wisdom is the management of desire. Knowledge provides information. Wisdom governs the use of it. A person may understand desire completely while remaining controlled by it. Wisdom emerges when understanding begins influencing action. The relationship between impulse and behavior changes. This does not require eliminating desire. Desire remains one of the primary forces behind human activity. Wisdom consists in recognizing its nature without becoming its servant. The wise person is not free from desire. They are free from obedience to every desire. Desire changes form more often than it ends. Many believe maturity eliminates desire. More often, desire simply changes its object. The ambitions of youth differ from the ambitions of age, yet the underlying mechanism remains remarkably similar. The pursuit of pleasure becomes the pursuit of status. The pursuit of status becomes the pursuit of security. Security gives way to legacy, recognition, or meaning. The targets evolve while the impulse survives. Desire adapts itself to circumstance, appearing in forms appropriate to each stage of life. The actor changes costumes. The role remains the same. The pursuit of more often obscures what is enough. Human attention naturally gravitates toward what is absent. This tendency encourages improvement, ambition, and progress. Yet it also creates a blindness toward sufficiency. Individuals become so focused on obtaining more that they lose awareness of what they already possess. The result is a peculiar form of poverty amid abundance. Achievements accumulate while satisfaction remains postponed. Fulfillment is continuously relocated into the future. Enough remains invisible to those who define themselves by what is missing. Ambition is both builder and destroyer. Ambition has produced extraordinary achievements. It drives exploration, innovation, mastery, and accomplishment. At the same time, it can consume peace, distort priorities, and transform life into a perpetual competition against imagined deficiencies. The same force that creates greatness can create misery. The difference lies not in ambition itself, but in the relationship one forms with it. A useful servant becomes a dangerous master when allowed to govern everything. Fire illuminates and destroys according to how it is contained. Comparison converts progress into deficiency. Progress should increase satisfaction. Comparison often prevents it. An individual may advance considerably yet feel stagnant because attention remains fixed upon someone further ahead. Gains disappear beneath relative evaluation. This process has no natural endpoint. No matter how much is achieved, another example can always be found that appears superior. Comparison continually manufactures new standards. A race against others has no finish line because new competitors constantly appear. Status depends upon observation. Many pursuits derive their value not from utility but from visibility. Status requires an audience. Recognition, prestige, and social position depend upon the awareness of others. Without observers, many status symbols lose much of their significance. This does not make status meaningless. Human beings are social creatures. Reputation influences opportunity, trust, and influence. Yet its dependence upon observation creates instability. What exists only in the eyes of others remains vulnerable to their attention. Reputation lives outside its owner. A reputation belongs to others more than to the individual it describes. It exists as a collection of impressions distributed across many minds. Because of this, reputation remains only partially controllable. Actions influence it, but interpretation completes the process. Different observers often reach different conclusions from identical events. The desire to manage every perception creates frustration because perception itself remains beyond direct command. One may own their actions. Their reputation is merely rented. Influence often operates invisibly. People tend to notice direct causes while overlooking subtle ones, yet much of what shapes behavior works beneath conscious awareness. Culture, environment, expectations, incentives, and social norms guide decisions long before individuals recognize their influence. What feels like independent judgment frequently contains invisible contributions from surrounding conditions. This does not eliminate personal responsibility. It simply reveals the complexity behind human behavior. The strongest currents are often those least visible from the surface. Environment shapes character. Character is commonly treated as an entirely internal quality. In reality, it develops through constant interaction with external conditions. People adapt to the expectations, opportunities, and pressures surrounding them. Habits emerge within environments that reward certain behaviors and discourage others. This influence is powerful because it operates gradually. Small adjustments accumulate until they become part of identity itself. The soil influences the tree long before the tree appears strong enough to stand alone. Freedom requires constraint. Freedom is often imagined as the absence of limitation. Yet many forms of freedom emerge only through self-imposed constraints. Financial freedom requires discipline. Intellectual freedom requires study. Physical freedom requires care of the body. Meaningful independence often depends upon obligations willingly accepted. Without structure, possibilities become difficult to sustain. The pursuit of unrestricted freedom frequently produces dependence rather than autonomy. A river reaches the sea because its banks provide direction. Mastery begins with self-government. The desire to influence circumstances, opportunities, and outcomes is nearly universal. Yet lasting influence usually begins closer to home. A person unable to direct their own attention, habits, emotions, or impulses remains vulnerable regardless of external success. Internal disorder eventually weakens external achievements. Self-government is demanding because it requires consistency rather than occasional effort. It replaces reaction with intention and impulse with judgment. The first territory worth mastering is the one from which every decision originates. Power over others is limited. Many devote enormous effort to influencing the actions, opinions, and decisions of others. While influence is possible, control remains elusive. Every individual possesses motives, desires, experiences, and priorities that cannot be fully directed from the outside. Attempts to dominate them often produce resistance rather than obedience. This reality frustrates those who seek certainty through control. Human beings are not instruments to be operated according to design. They remain independent centers of intention. The farther influence reaches, the weaker it tends to become. Power over oneself is rare. People frequently overestimate their self-mastery. They assume control because intentions are easy to form and difficult to test. Yet attention wanders, habits persist, emotions interfere, and impulses repeatedly challenge deliberate plans. The struggle between intention and behavior reveals how incomplete self-control often is. This gap explains why personal reform is more difficult than personal criticism. It is easier to identify weaknesses than to govern them. The hardest authority to establish is authority over oneself. Self-knowledge has no final stage. Many approach self-understanding as though it were a destination. They imagine a moment when their nature will be completely understood and permanently settled. Human beings rarely remain fixed long enough for such certainty. Circumstances change, experiences accumulate, and perspectives evolve. The self being examined today differs from the self that existed years ago. For this reason, self-knowledge remains an ongoing process rather than a completed achievement. New conditions reveal previously unseen aspects of character. The deeper the examination becomes, the more unfinished it appears. Wisdom increases awareness of ignorance. Knowledge often creates confidence. Wisdom frequently creates caution. The more deeply individuals investigate reality, the more complexity they encounter. Questions multiply faster than answers. Simple explanations give way to intricate relationships and hidden variables. This realization does not produce despair. It produces humility. Understanding expands while awareness of remaining ignorance expands alongside it. A shallow pond reflects certainty. Depth reveals mystery. Mystery is not a defect. People often treat uncertainty as a problem waiting to be solved, yet some aspects of existence resist complete explanation. Questions concerning consciousness, meaning, existence, and purpose have accompanied humanity for centuries without yielding final answers. Their persistence suggests limits to explanation itself. The desire to eliminate all mystery reflects the same longing for certainty that appears throughout human life. Reality does not always accommodate that desire. Some questions endure not because they lack answers, but because they exceed simple ones. Acceptance completes understanding. Understanding alone does not always bring peace. A person may recognize reality clearly while continuing to struggle against it. Acceptance introduces a different element. It acknowledges what understanding has already revealed and ceases demanding that reality become something else. This shift does not remove hardship, loss, or limitation. It changes the relationship to them. Resistance weakens, and unnecessary conflict subsides. Knowledge observes reality, acceptance learns to live with it. Peace emerges from alignment. Inner conflict arises when desires, beliefs, actions, and circumstances move in opposing directions. Peace becomes possible when these forces achieve greater harmony. Thought supports action, action reflects values, and expectations correspond more closely to reality. This condition remains imperfect and temporary, yet even brief moments reveal its significance. The mind expends less energy arguing with itself. Peace is not found in the absence of movement, but in the absence of contradiction. Understanding softens desire. Desire appears strongest when its promises remain unquestioned. It convinces by directing attention toward imagined rewards, while concealing familiar patterns. With experience comes recognition. The cycle becomes visible. Anticipation rises, fulfillment arrives, satisfaction fades, and desire begins again. Awareness alters the relationship to the process. Desire does not disappear, but its authority weakens. What was once compelling becomes understandable. An illusion loses much of its power once its mechanism is revealed. The search returns to its origin. Many intellectual journeys begin with questions about the world and gradually arrive at questions about the self. The search expands outward through experience, knowledge, ambition, disappointment, and reflection. Eventually, however, attention returns to the forces that initiated movement in the first place. What seemed distant reveals itself as familiar. The beginning and the ending become connected through understanding. The longest journeys often curve back toward their point of departure. Life begins and ends with desire. At the start of life, desire creates movement before understanding exists. At the end of understanding, desire remains present, though viewed differently. Every pursuit, achievement, disappointment, lesson, and realization emerges from this fundamental force. Desire initiates action, generates experience, and drives the search for meaning itself. The purpose of reflection is not to destroy desire, but to understand it. Through understanding, its influence becomes clearer, and its promises easier to evaluate. The circle closes where it began.